Honkai Star has several different classes that are based off of the paths that exist in the game's lore. Hunt characters are pretty much your single target DPS, abundance are typically healers, and preservation characters are most often tanks. The team building meta at the moment focuses more on hypercarry team comps, with one main damage dealer and the rest being supportive, such as abundance, harmony, and preservation characters that act in unison to buff that one carry. As we explore more of the game, this meta has naturally begun to shift. We are starting to see comps that focus on breaks and damage over time, for example, being viable under certain circumstances. However, there is one group that at the moment have yet to find a niche within the overall meta, despite having some really fun characters as part of its roster. I'm referring of course to the Erudition characters. Before we discuss their potential role, if you want to see more Honkai Star content, do consider subscribing to the channel. Erudition characters are generally designed to be AoE damage dealers. They have kits that mostly focus on doing damage to a large group of enemies at the same time. Take Jing Yuan for example. Each attack he does outside of his basic attack can target all enemies on the field. Most of them have mechanics that enable this in some way, such as Himeko with her buzzsaw drone and Herta with her spin of death. When it comes to clearing lower HP mobs, most of them do a really good job of it, and any of you who have tried them while farming calyxes will know how satisfying it is to continuously proc their mechanic and clear the board. The issue is that as handy as they are in farming situations, most enemies in such content aren't typically difficult that you absolutely need them. When you get to the tankier boss type enemies, the AoE of Erudition characters suddenly become less powerful, or maybe the right word is less desirable. As I mentioned earlier, the current meta focuses on one hypercarry with a shielder, healer, and buffer. By including an Erudition character, you may lose out on one of these utilities in exchange for more spread out damage. You could play them as the main DPS, but replacing your single target hunt character with an Erudition may cause your damage output to decrease overall. There is something to be said though if your Erudition character can break most enemies, giving you more control over the fight, but eventually you'd still be left with just the boss, a situation that again values single target. Now I know some of you might be going, well, my Jing Yuan is super strong and this doesn't seem to be a problem for me at all. Well, Jing Yuan is an exception simply because his single target and AoE deal almost the same amount of damage because of how his Lightning Lord works. The testing that the Pridewind site has done shows pretty much this pattern. But imagine if you replace Jing Yuan with any of the other Erudition characters like Himeko or Herta, and the results would likely not be the same. On top of that, despite Jing Yuan being rated very highly, every other Erudition character is rated pretty low, which is an indication of how they do not match the current content types that we have today. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying here. I'm not saying that all Erudition characters are bad, but rather I think that the current content just isn't designed for them. Even if you need a little bit of AoE or multi-target coverage, destruction characters like Clara and the upcoming Blade can do those roles better than the current Erudition ones. Obviously, if the enemy or boss is single target, then complaining about an AoE character underperforming is just out of place because they're not designed for it. Plus, we already know that if you're farming calyxes or something, then Erudition characters perform pretty well. But those type of contents are again not typically difficult, and so there isn't any circumstance in which you would choose an Erudition character over a hunt or destruction one in terms of DPS. So are there situations where Erudition becomes valuable and needed in your teams? The first idea that I can think of is if you're fighting against bosses who can summon additional adds or monsters who can potentially overwhelm you. They may be dangerous enough that an AoE character now becomes viable. There are also certain boss enemies that can eat their minions to gain buffs, which if you just let them do it will make the fight that much harder, and so clearing these adds become more important. We've also started to see bosses in the story like the Ebon Deer who will continuously summon supportive monsters, and the longer you take to clear them, the more dangerous the fight becomes, making AoE characters potentially more desirable. I suppose situations like these can be considered suitable or made just for Erudition type characters, but for now, it seems that despite them existing, players generally still value hunt or destruction characters. The community tier list rates erudition characters generally lower on average than hunt or destruction ones, which may be an indication that these examples could still be dealt with without absolutely needing an erudition type character. I spent some time thinking about what type of content that would benefit them the most, but I really couldn't think of any where I would prefer to have an erudition DPS over a hunt or destruction one. Perhaps a gauntlet type content like climbing a tower or something where you continuously defeat waves of normal enemies on a timer would be something suited for erudition, but that's the best I could come up with at this time. Now obviously, I want to reiterate here that I didn't come up with this video just to speak badly about erudition characters, but rather, I feel they are underappreciated more because the content itself isn't suited for them. If you like some of these erudition characters, don't let me convince you not to play them. I myself am working towards getting Qing Chui to 70 just because I'm an RNG addict and a character that throws quantum powered mahjong tiles at all enemies is just hilarious to me. I also have a Serval at level 70 who is performing just fine. The game isn't at a point where you absolutely have to play it a certain way, at least to me, so just take this video as an open discussion. I hope that in the future we get content that can fully utilize these characters or even make them a little bit more desirable compared to their hunt and destruction DPS counterparts, because from a lore point of view, the erudition characters we have are all well designed and interesting. Although, now that I think about it, why is erudition an AoE group when the Eon of Erudition Noose is just a giant sentient computer and mostly aims to gain knowledge? Does the pursuit of knowledge and AoE have something in common? I digress, it's not a question for this video. If you have any ideas about what type of content that the erudition characters would be the best at, feel free to share them in the comments and do consider liking and subscribing to the channel. I'll end the video here and I'll see you in the next one, and as usual, have a nice day.